He thought she was just an old woman. He didn't know who her son was. What happened next changed the town forever. Stay to the end. The morning sun had just begun to stretch across Ryan, Oklahoma, painting the small town in warm, golden light that clung to rooftops and trees like a gentle promise. It was the kind of morning where the world seemed to pause, where even the cicadas held their breath for a few final minutes before their daily chorus began. The breeze was soft, the streets nearly empty, and everything felt like it was holding on to a quiet that had not yet been broken. On the worn porch of a white-clapboard cottage, Wilma Scarberry stood, her hands gently adjusting the brim of her straw hat. The house was old, older than most people in town remembered, and every nail and creak carried the memory of her late husband's hands. A hanging basket of petunias swayed beside her shoulder as she stepped carefully down the steps, avoiding the crack in the third board as she always did. Her movements were slow but precise, every step familiar, every motion a quiet ritual. Wilma wore a pale lavender dress, simple but neat, cinched modestly at the waist with a thin belt. Her shoes were practical, not pretty. Her thick silver hair was pulled back into a knot at the nape of her neck. She carried herself with a certain dignity, not one that came from money or fame, but from a lifetime of showing up, staying rooted, enduring. In her left hand, she held a folded canvas shopping bag. In her right, she pulled a small cart with rubber wheels that squeaked faintly as they turned. She didn't mind the sound. It reminded her that she was still moving, still capable, still independent. It was market day in Ryan. The town square came to life early, just after dawn, when the farmers laid out their harvest. Fresh eggs still speckled with straw, tomatoes warm from the greenhouse, bundles of green beans, and jars of wildflower honey with handwritten labels. Wilma liked to arrive early, before the rush, before the noise. Her list was short today: butter, green beans, and if Mr. Dillard had them, a jar of his muscadine jelly. She walked with quiet purpose down Hawthorne Avenue, where the sidewalks curved and the flagstone path was cracked in places. People knew her here. They always had. Not because she asked for recognition, quite the opposite, but because she'd never left. She had taught their children, led food drives, sat at funerals, and brought meals to the sick. She was a fixture in Ryan, a presence. "Mornin', Miss Wilma," came a voice from across the street. She turned slightly, smiling as a teen on a bicycle waved and wobbled past. "Mornin', Corey. Tell your mama I said hello." Further down the road, a middle-aged man in a dusty work shirt tipped his hat. "Ma'am," he said simply. Wilma nodded. "Mr. Darnell." That was how it was in Ryan. Simple greetings, long memories. And though Wilma rarely brought it up, people knew who her son was. More than that, they knew who her son raised. Mike Tyson. Not the young bruiser from old TV reels or the controversial figure from magazine covers. Not even the man whose fights brought living rooms to silence. To Wilma, he was Michael, her only child's only son, her grandson, her boy. She had raised him part of the time when his mother worked double shifts, helped him with school, packed his lunches, sat with him when his fists were too quick and his teachers didn't understand. She never bragged. She never had to. The square was waking up when she arrived. White tents dotted the market area, their canopies fluttering gently. The smell of early morning bread wafted from the corner where the bakery truck was parked. Farmers were still unloading crates, setting up jars, sweeping off their tables. Wilma moved among them quietly, exchanging greetings, touching peaches with light fingers, weighing green beans in her palm like she could judge their worth by feel alone. She was leaning over a basket of okra, about to ask the price, when a voice cut through the quiet rhythm of the morning. "Hey," I said, "don't loiter here." The voice came from the parking lot just beyond the market. Wilma looked up. The tone was wrong. Too loud, too sharp. A tall man in a tan uniform stood with arms crossed, towering over 4 teenagers beside their bicycles. 2 of the boys were black, 1 Latino, and the 4th white. They were holding a small football, obviously mid-joke or mid-toss. Their body language had shifted, now tense, wary. The man's nameplate read D. Cross. Sheriff Denny Cross. He was new. Elected just over a year ago in a heated race that divided the town more than anyone wanted to admit. Late 30s, blonde, thick in the chest and shoulders like he worked out for image, not health. He'd transferred in from a neighboring county with slogans about order and discipline. But beneath the smile he wore at campaign rallies, Wilma had always sensed something else, something colder. He hadn't grown up in Ryan. He didn't know its people, not really, but he wore his badge like a shield and carried himself like a man who wanted to be feared before he was respected. Now he was standing over those boys like a storm cloud. "You think this is a playground?" he barked. "You don't hang around the parking lot. You got business, do it. Otherwise, move." The boys said little. Their postures spoke volumes, shoulders pulled in, eyes low, jaws tight. Wilma stepped forward. She didn't rush, she didn't raise her voice, but her presence turned heads. "Excuse me, Sheriff," she said, her voice calm but cutting. "Is there a problem here?" Cross turned, irritation already forming on his face. At first, he didn't recognize her, just another senior woman interrupting his performance. But then his expression shifted, recognition flickering like static. She saw it. The fake smile, the calculation. "Not unless you make one, ma'am," he said, the words too smooth. Wilma nodded at the boys. "These young men live here. They go to school here. Maybe instead of yelling at them, you could take a moment to learn their names." A hush crept into the market. Someone behind a stall stopped stacking jars. A woman paused with a peach in her hand. Cross's jaw flexed. "Oh? And I suppose you're an expert in law enforcement now?" Wilma didn't flinch. "No, but I do know what abuse of authority looks like. I've lived through enough of it." Cross's eyes narrowed. "I suggest you keep walking." She held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded once and turned, resuming her path down the market. The wheels of her cart squeaked behind her, rhythmic and steady. She didn't look back, but the air around her had changed, tighter, like a held breath. She could feel it, the sheriff's eyes, the weight of his ego bruised in front of a crowd. The boys dispersed quietly. The football was tucked away, but Wilma knew this wasn't the end of it. She finished her shopping in silence. She picked up her butter, her green beans. She found muscadine jelly at the edge of a folding table and placed it gently in her cart. But her thoughts didn't leave the parking lot. They stayed rooted in that moment, in the look on Cross's face, the twitch of his jaw, the kind of man who thought her age made her weak, that her calm made her small, that her voice was something to dismiss. The morning had started golden, still and gentle, but as she passed beneath the magnolia trees on the walk home, the petals brushing the hem of her dress, Wilma felt something else in the air. It wasn't heat. It was the promise of something brewing. And in her bones, she knew the storm hadn't hit yet, but it was coming. The sun had risen higher over Ryan, but the warmth from earlier now seemed distant, even misleading. As Wilma stepped away from the last vendor stall and turned onto the path toward home, the gentle noise of the market began to fade. The streets she knew so well, The ones she had walked for decades no longer felt quite as familiar. There was something different in the air now. Not visible, not obvious, but undeniable. She crossed near the library, the brick building sitting silent and still, and turned into the narrow alley behind it. It was a shortcut she had taken countless times, cutting between the post office and the community bulletin board, saving her a few minutes on the walk home. On most days, it was just a quiet path framed by magnolia trees and weathered walls. Today, every step echoed a little too loudly. Her cart's wheels squeaked in the silence, no longer a comforting rhythm, but a noise that betrayed her presence. She adjusted her grip, pretending not to notice the shift in her breathing. The hem of her dress brushed fallen petals, and the sidewalk's uneven cracks tugged at her feet, but she didn't slow. Then she heard it. A second set of footsteps. Not fast, not loud, but intentional. She didn't turn, didn't quicken her pace, didn't break stride. She had learned long ago that fear invited danger, that sudden movements drew the wrong kind of attention. Instead, she kept walking, each step deliberate, her spine straight. "Ma'am?" a voice called behind her, clipped, low, and too familiar. Wilma stopped. The cart gave a final squeak before falling silent. She turned slowly. Sheriff Denny Cross stood 5 feet behind her, his face shadowed by the overhanging branches and the sun behind him. The neatness of his uniform was gone now. The tan shirt was slightly rumpled, the top button undone. His jaw was set, lips thin. One hand rested near his belt, just inches from the flashlight clipped to his side. The other hand hung loose, fingers twitching slightly. "You got a minute?" he asked, but the way he said it wasn't a question. Wilma didn't blink. "I'm walking home." "You went out of your way to embarrass me today," he said, stepping closer. "You made a scene, in front of everyone." "I didn't raise my voice," she said. "I offered perspective. You undermined an officer. I spoke up." His face tightened. "Funny how people think that makes them brave." "What do you want, Sheriff?" Her tone remained neutral, but her gaze didn't waver. "You live around here?" "You know I do. Mind proving it?" The question hung in the air, heavy and deliberate. It was absurd. He knew exactly who she was, but that wasn't the point. This wasn't about identity. It was about control, about power. "I've lived on Hawthorne for 52 years, she said. "I'm going home." She stepped to the side to walk around him. He didn't move. Then his arm came out. Not fast, not aggressive at first, just firm. His hand gripped her upper arm tightly, fingers locking like a vise. She stumbled slightly, and the cart wobbled, its contents shifting and rattling. "Don't walk away from me," he said, his voice lower now, dangerous. Wilma looked down at his hand, then up at his face. "You're hurting me." He leaned closer, his breath warm and sour. "You think you can talk to me like that and just keep walking?" She didn't answer. She tried to pull her arm away, gently at first, but he held tighter, and then, without warning, he yanked her forward and shoved her back. Her shoulder slammed into the brick wall. The rough mortar scraped her skin through the thin fabric of her dress. Her hat tumbled to the ground. One of her shoes slipped halfway off her foot. The handle of her cart twisted awkwardly as it tipped onto its side. She gripped the wall behind her, catching her balance, and then he pressed his forearm across her chest, just beneath the collarbone, pinning her. Not a chokehold, but a message. The kind of move that doesn't leave a mark, unless you know where to look. Wilma gasped, the weight crushing her ribs. Her hands pushed against his arm, not in resistance, but in self-preservation. "You don't get to do this," she said, her voice strained but unwavering. "You're resisting," he growled. "I'm standing." Time fractured, slowed. Somewhere beyond the alley, a bird chirped. A car passed on the distant road. A breeze stirred the magnolia leaves above them, but here, in the narrow stretch of pavement where shadows swallowed sound, the world was frozen. And then, a voice. "Hey, get your hands off her!" It came from the sidewalk at the alley's mouth. A woman, elderly, holding a bag of groceries, stood frozen, eyes wide. The bag slipped from her hand and apples tumbled onto the pavement, rolling toward the gutter. Cross turned, irritated. "This your business, lady?" That was his mistake. The second his focus shifted, the pressure on Wilma's chest eased. She took a shallow breath. Her fingers still trembled. Her dress was wrinkled, her back ached, but she stayed upright. Cross turned back to her, confusion flashing in his eyes. He sensed the moment slipping from his grasp, and then, from around the corner, a roar. Tires. A dark gray pickup truck tore into the alley entrance, its engine low and angry. The brakes screeched as it came to a sudden stop, inches from the overturned cart. The door swung open, and out stepped a man, tall, broad-shouldered, in faded jeans and a plain black t-shirt. His hands were scarred, his walk slow and purposeful, his face unmistakable. Mike Tyson. Wilma exhaled sharply. He didn't speak, he didn't shout, he just walked. Cross turned, blinking in disbelief. "This doesn't concern—" He didn't finish, because Mike didn't wait. In a blur of motion, Tyson's hand struck Cross's wrist, knocking it aside. Before Cross could react, Mike pivoted, grabbed him by the collar, twisted, and sent him sprawling to the ground. It wasn't dramatic. It was precise. Surgical. Cross hit the pavement with a grunt, his badge scraping against the concrete. He lay there, stunned, blinking up at the sky. Mike turned to Wilma, his voice low and steady. "You okay?" She nodded once, her breath still shallow. He stepped over the fallen cart and offered her his hand, not out of pity, but respect. She took it. Their hands met, his rough, calloused, hers trembling but steady. He helped her stand fully. She adjusted her dress, picked up her hat. Her fingers brushed away the dust from the wall behind her. Across the street, more eyes had appeared, from windows, porches, sidewalks. People had heard the noise. Some were already filming. Cross sat up, coughing, his pride scattered across the alley floor. Mike didn't gloat, didn't posture. He simply stood there, calm, firm, immovable. Cross looked up at him, eyes darting between Mike and the gathering crowd. He opened his mouth to say something, but the words didn't come. There was nothing to say. Wilma looked around, at the people watching, at the silent camera phones, at the crumpled sheriff on the ground. Then she looked at her son. "I didn't expect you," she said. Mike shook his head. "I saw the video. I was already on the road." The alley held its breath. Cross slowly rose to his feet, brushing off his shirt, trying to collect what was left of his authority. Mike stepped forward once, just once. "You need to leave," he said. It wasn't loud, it wasn't a threat, it was a sentence. Cross blinked, his mouth twitching. For a moment, he looked like a man ready to argue. But then he saw the people, the phones, the eyes, and he turned. He walked away, slowly, awkwardly, his boots scraping against the alley floor like shame dragging behind him. Wilma didn't speak. She didn't have to, because the silence had said enough. And the storm she had felt that morning, it had broken, but not in violence, in truth. The alley had returned to silence, but the silence was different now. It wasn't the hush of early morning calm. It was the charged quiet that follows lightning. The air felt heavier, People stood on sidewalks, stunned, their phones still raised, their expressions caught between disbelief and awakening. Wilma stood beside her son, one hand resting lightly on the cart he had just set upright. Most of the contents had spilled. Eggs cracked, green beans scattered, the jar of muscadine jelly lying on its side, unbroken. Her dress was dust-streaked, her collar bruised, yet she was upright, composed, unbroken. Mike Tyson stood still, his body language calm, but his eyes never left the direction where the sheriff had disappeared. Only once the tension fully evaporated did Wilma speak. "Let's go home." Mike nodded. They walked side by side, her hand lightly on his arm, past the growing cluster of townspeople, past the whispering voices, past the ones filming. No one tried to stop them. No one dared. Back at the house, Mike opened the door for her the same way he did as a boy, gently, with both hands, like it was something sacred. Inside, everything was the same. The scent of lemon oil on old wood, the clinking of the wind chimes by the porch, the afternoon light spilling through the lace curtains. Wilma sat in her usual chair by the window. Mike retrieved the first aid kit from beneath the sink. He crouched beside her, his massive frame strangely careful as he cleaned the scrape on her arm. He didn't speak. Neither did she. Only once, when he pressed gauze into a deeper part of the wound, did she flinch. "I saw it," he finally said, "the video. It was already online. I was in the truck before it finished loading." Wilma gave a small nod. "Good thing you're still quick." He managed a slight smile. "You always taught me to move fast when it mattered." Outside, the town continued as if nothing had happened. A lawnmower buzzed faintly from 2 houses down. Children laughed somewhere in the distance. But inside, things had changed, not just between mother and son, but for the entire town. Mike finished bandaging her arm and leaned back, sitting on the edge of the coffee table. He didn't ask if she was okay. He already knew the answer. Wilma took a sip of water and looked at him. "He didn't do it because I raised my voice," she said softly. "He did it because I didn't lower it." Mike nodded slowly, his expression grim. "He thought I'd stay quiet, that I was too old, too tired, too alone to make trouble." "But you weren't alone," Mike said. His voice was steady, but the fire in it flickered beneath the surface. Wilma tilted her head. "No, not this time." That evening, the phones began to ring. First it was her neighbor, then the pastor, then someone from the city council. Then came the reporter from the local station, asking for a quote. Mike handled most of the calls. His voice was calm, his tone measured. He declined interviews. He told them Wilma would speak when she was ready, not before. By nightfall, the video had been shared across the country. The headline on one major site read, "Sheriff assaults elderly woman in alley. Didn't know she was Mike Tyson's mother." People laughed, others raged, but no one dismissed it. The sheriff's office released a cold, rehearsed statement. "We are aware of the incident and are reviewing all relevant footage. Appropriate measures will be taken." It meant nothing. Not anymore, because people weren't waiting for their permission to speak. The following morning, townspeople began arriving at Wilma's porch. Some brought food. Some brought folded letters. Most brought little more than silence and eyes filled with something they hadn't known how to express before. Shame, regret, solidarity. Mike stood nearby, quietly guarding the front steps. He didn't try to speak for her. He didn't try to lead. His mere presence was enough, a reminder that someone powerful was now paying attention. That same morning, 3 more videos surfaced online. Moments caught in grocery stores, parking lots, school zones, each one showing Sheriff Cross berating, following, or cornering residents of color. One was a teenage boy walking home from basketball practice. Another was a single mother trying to pick up medicine. A third was an elderly black man at a gas station. The patterns were no longer whispers. They were proof. Wilma, seated at the dining table, opened her notebook. On the first page, in slow, deliberate handwriting, she began to write a list of names, people she trusted, people who had lived enough to recognize truth, people who wouldn't be swayed by political convenience. She was building a room, not a courtroom, not a mob, a room where people could finally speak and be heard. Mike watched from across the room. He had seen fights in rings, heard roars of arenas, walked through storms of media and fire. But this was something different, something quieter, but far more powerful. It was his mother, and she was building a revolution with a pen. That afternoon, the mayor called. 3 times. Mike answered each time. The first, the mayor asked to speak with Wilma directly. The second, he asked if a statement could be arranged to calm things down. The third time, he just asked, "What do you want?" Mike replied with only one word: change. The following evening, Wilma and Mike attended a quiet meeting in the back room of the community center. There were only 14 people: a pastor, a school principal, a retired postal worker, 2 high school students, a few local mothers, 1 white farmer. All had experienced moments, some small, some large, of fear, of being overlooked, of being silenced. Wilma didn't open the meeting with a speech. She simply said, "Tell me your story." And they did, one by one. The stories unraveled like threads, tying themselves together into something undeniable. "I never called the police," said a young woman, "because they never came when I needed them." "I was followed for 3 blocks," said the farmer. "No lights, just slow and watching." "My son got pulled over on a bicycle," a mother said, "and they frisked him, a 14-year-old boy." Each voice added weight. Each face added truth, and Wilma listened. Mike stood in the corner, arms crossed, head slightly bowed. For the first time in a long time, the town wasn't just talking. It was listening. By the time the meeting ended, Wilma's list had doubled. She added names as people filed out, promised to call them, asked if they'd be willing to stand with her when the time came. "What time?" someone asked. "When the town decides if it's ready to change," she answered. Later that night, Mike stepped out onto the porch alone. The town was quiet again, but not asleep. Lights still burned in windows. Voices still murmured on porches. And the alley, the one that had become ground zero, now bore new footprints, new weight. He sat on the steps and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Inside, Wilma was still writing. And in the stillness, something burned. Not vengeance, not rage, resolve. Mike Tyson had never been afraid of a fight. But this wasn't his fight. It was hers. And now the whole town was watching. Tuesday arrived under a gray sky. Clouds hung low over Ryan, Oklahoma, as if even the heavens were uncertain how the day would end. There had been threats of rain, but none had come. Instead, there was a kind of stillness that arrives before something begins. Not a storm, but a reckoning. At the Scarberry house, Wilma finished adjusting the collar of her gray blouse. Her movements were slow but deliberate. She had chosen the brooch carefully, a small silver dove. Peace was important, but so was memory. Mike waited by the door. He wore a dark button-down shirt tucked into clean jeans. He didn't look like the fighter on TV, the heavyweight champion with fists like wrecking balls. Today, he looked like a son, present, steady, and quiet. "They'll be expecting you to speak first," he said gently. Wilma gave a faint smile. Let them wait a little. By the time they reached the town council chamber, it was already full, more than full. People stood along the walls, sat on the floor in the back, filled the windowsills. A group of students from the high school sat in the front row, holding simple signs. "We see you. Protect the people." One sign read only 2 words, "For Wilma." Camera crews lined the back wall, but none dared push forward. It wasn't their moment. It belonged to the town. The mayor, seated at a long table on the stage, shuffled his papers nervously. His opening statement, clearly typed and rehearsed, spoke of concern, of transparency, of community trust. His voice trembled once when he said Wilma's name. Then he gestured to the podium. The room shifted as Wilma stood. She didn't bring notes, didn't need them. She walked slowly to the podium, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. She looked out at the room, the same room where she had once helped organize food drives, where she had handed out spelling bee ribbons, where she had watched the children of the town become its adults. "I'm not here," she began, her voice clear and calm, "because of what happened to me. I'm here because of what that moment revealed." A hush settled over the crowd. It revealed something about power, who holds it, who fears losing it, and it revealed something about silence, how easily it becomes the soil where injustice grows. She paused. Her hands rested gently on the podium, one finger tapping slowly. "I was not attacked because I shouted. I was attacked because I didn't bow, because I didn't pretend I didn't see, because I refused to be less than I am." A man in the third row lowered his head. A woman near the back wiped her eyes. "The oversight board you're voting on today isn't a punishment. It's a promise. A promise that this town, my town, can be better. That we can name what's wrong and still love where we live." She scanned the room, landing briefly on the face of each council member. "This isn't about me, or my son. It's about all the people who didn't have someone arrive in a truck, all the people who weren't filmed, who were afraid, who still are." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The truth sat heavily in the air. Then she stepped back. No applause followed, just silence. That kind of silence that comes not from agreement, but from realization. The vote was unanimous. By the end of the week, the Ryan Civilian Oversight Board was officially formed. Wilma was offered the chair position. She declined. "Give it to someone younger," she said. "Someone who'll still be here long after I'm gone." But she agreed to serve as an advisor, which everyone knew meant she'd be at every meeting anyway. The reforms didn't stop there. Mandatory de-escalation training was introduced for the sheriff's department. Complaints against officers were made public record. Officers were required to attend quarterly town forums. A new liaison program was established to connect law enforcement with local schools and community leaders. And something else changed. Something harder to measure. People started showing up, not just to meetings, to each other. A week after the vote, Mike hosted the first self-defense class at the community center. He didn't advertise it. He didn't put his name on the flyers. He just showed up with a box of mats and a quiet invitation. Teenagers came. Single mothers came. A few older men came, their joints stiff, but their eyes determined. Wilma sat in the back, clipboard in hand, checking in names, handing out waivers, pouring water. She didn't give speeches. She watched, and she smiled. The town fair arrived in early fall, like it always did, with caramel apples and funnel cakes, with hay rides and pie contests. Wilma went with her usual list in her usual cart. But people stopped her more often now, not to gawk, to thank, to ask what came next. She pointed them to the bulletin board outside the library. The next oversight board meeting was posted there. "Come," she'd say, "you don't have to have a speech, you just have to show up." 2 weeks later, the high school invited her to speak to the senior civics class. She brought a small notebook, some newspaper clippings, and a mason jar of tea. The students, many of whom had watched the video, many of whom had signs at the council chamber, sat silently as she spoke. Laws matter, she told them, but what matters more is how they're written, who writes them, who they protect, and who they forget. One student raised her hand. "What made you finally speak up?" Wilma didn't hesitate. "I always spoke. This time people were ready to hear it." As October settled over the town, and leaves began to gather in golden clusters at the corners of the square, Wilma walked the long way home one evening. She passed the alley and paused. The brick wall still stood, cleaned but unchanged. Only now it bore something new, a mural. Painted in careful strokes, in muted but powerful colors, it showed a woman standing with her back to the wall, one hand against the stone, her face lifted toward the light. Her shadow stretched long behind her, and in that shadow stood the outline of a crowd, a town. In small white letters beneath it, someone had painted, "She stood, and we followed." Wilma didn't cry. She didn't touch the wall. She just stood there for a long moment, her fingers curled around the handle of her cart. Then she nodded once and walked home. Justice hadn't come easily. It hadn't come quickly, but it had come, not with sirens or fists, but with presence, with truth, with a woman who never needed to shout to be heard, and a son who showed the world what it meant to stand behind someone, not in front of them. Her voice didn't need to be loud, it needed to be heard. If this story touched you, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what moment hit you the hardest. Share this with someone who believes in quiet strength and real change.